Well, hi again, everyone. Patrick Pfingsten here. I write the Illinoize political newsletter at theillinoize.com. Welcome to our almost sort of weekly podcast. We're glad to be back. We took a couple of weeks off in the middle of June and had a good time going out of the country with the family, and hope you've had a good last few weeks too. Coming up on the show, we'll talk a little bit about state politics, state government, some of the issues surrounding the end of the state legislative session about a month ago and the budget drama that came along with it. We'll talk to one of the freshman progressives in the state Senate, State Senator Rachel Ventura from Joliet. She has some interesting perspectives on things and interested in, as always, presenting all points of view as we can in this podcast, in this newsletter that we do. And we'll also talk to Jeremy Gorner, a State House reporter for the Chicago Tribune. All that and more coming up. First, though, a couple of things worth talking about. I think we have to start with the hubbub over the immigrant health insurance program over the last few weeks. Starting with, this program is intended for people who are in the country illegally, undocumented, whatever terminology you want to use, and Lord knows terminology matters to everybody now. It's a state-run Medicaid style program that is intended simply for those demographics, since they don't fall under a federal Medicaid and there's no real backdrop for them in the system. The plan has been more expensive. The program has been more expensive in the last couple of years than anticipated. The governor's office, throughout the legislative session, explained to the legislature that they expected this program to be closer to 1.1 billion. The legislature passed 550 million for the program in the final budget, which and then what they all like to call the tools, which is rulemaking authority, that would allow the governor to keep those costs in check. And then a couple of weeks ago, the governor's office announces just that they're going to freeze enrollment. They're going to make changes to maybe more of a managed care program. And you get some freak out from some of those who specifically said that they voted for the budget. They voted for the rulemaking. They gave the governor this authority. So the governor's kind of been in this little bit of a in between a rock and a hard place with his progressive base over the last couple of weeks. Here's how he defended his actions earlier this week at a news conference in Chicago.
Look, we've all worked together to make sure, and we're talking about the Congress people as well as our members of the General Assembly and everybody who cares about this program, to provide health care, to provide this program for 63,000 people in the state of Illinois, and we're continuing to do that. In fact, there's room for a few more within the program and within the budget. Remember that the General Assembly provided $550 million for this program for FY24. That's about $300 million more than we had originally proposed in our budget. That's a good thing, and we need to make sure that we're living within our fiscal limits within the state of Illinois. That's something that wasn't done for a lot of years in Illinois, and now here in 2023 and going into our fiscal year 2024, balancing the budget and making sure that we're paying our bills and expanding and providing undocumented immigrants with health care that's like Medicaid is an important thing for us to continue to do. Well, you have to remember that we provide a certain Medicaid rate for people on Medicaid, and the rate that was being provided to Cook County was a super rate above that Medicaid rate. And so all we're doing is bringing Cook County back into line with all the other jurisdictions in terms of the Medicaid rate that's being paid for undocumented immigrant care.
So that's Governor Pritzker earlier this week talking about his decision to pause enrollment in this federal or in the state health insurance program for undocumented or illegal immigrants in the country. That issue is not going away, by the way, and there are still Democratic efforts to expand that program to essentially any adult illegal immigrant, undocumented immigrant, and there's probably going to be a push for some more money for the program at some point, depending on how state revenues shake out and if the state has any money when lawmakers come back to Springfield for veto session in October and November. It's also it's June 30th as we're putting this out, and it's the last day of the state fiscal year. The state comptroller has put another big deposit into the state's rainy day fund, so it's just under $2 billion right now, which is a nice cushion, especially when it was at zero during much of the Quinn and Rauner administrations. And also taxes going up on July 1st. That's the pause in the state grocery tax, which is a 1% tax, was in effect all of the current fiscal year. And I had a piece this week that the state says that it kind of saved consumers about $180 million through the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Of course, they won't have all of those sales tax receipts until probably September, October, when all of those numbers come in. But it's a 1% tax. So if you spend $100 on groceries, you get $1 savings. So it's not like consumers made bank on this. It did take a little extra money away from local governments, which is worthy of discussion, considering the state still isn't fully funding LGDF, the local government distributive fund. And there was the issue of the gas tax as well. Remember, they paused the inflation adjustment, the 2 cents or so last year, that was supposed to go into effect last July. So of course, Democrats ran to all of their media outlets and their campaign commercials and said, "I cut your gas tax," which in essence they didn't. They just let it remain flat for 6 months. Then you had a 2-cent increase on January 1st. And now you're going to have another 3-cent increase for inflation on July 1st. Meanwhile, here in the suburbs, we're still paying over $4 a gallon. So you can see that this was a political maneuver from the start for Democrats who were in it to win elections. And boy, howdy, did it work. But remember that this wasn't a big savings for you. And it was an election year gimmick for them. And I think we need to watch these sort of gimmicks with a more critical eye, and instead of just letting one side or the other take credit for what they did leading up to an election. All right, we're pleased to be joined now by Senator Rachel Ventura, one of the freshman Democrats in the state legislature, who just got through her first legislative session, and as I'm sure, as most freshmen would say, probably either a wide awakening or a rude awakening, depending on what party you're in. But Senator, first, as we're what, a month out now since you guys left Springfield, so reflect for me, if you would, on your first session and how it went, and if it met your expectations, and all of that.
Well, first, thank you for having me on. It was a whirlwind. I think one of the things that was really great that I brought to the table is I was previously elected official on the Will County Board. So understanding committee structures really help with the learning process, because the reality is there's no training manual. There's nobody who sits you down and says, this is every step of how you get a bill passed. It's kind of learn as you go. I was very aggressive in that learning process. I did have a senator mentor, but I went and spoke to as many senators as I could, talk with staff on a regular basis, continue to ask questions. And so unlike most freshmen, I hit the ground running with 44 bills, or it ended up being 45 bills that I filed. And I was able to get a number of them passed through the Senate, but ultimately 9 bills passed from the House and Senate and one in the omnibus package, with 3 more going to veto session. So I think that's pretty successful. But it was a lot of work, a lot of dedication. I often did not leave the Capitol until after 8 p.m. I think I really took my legislative assistant for a run too, because I kept her very busy. But I think ultimately, from a personal standpoint, it was a success. From an overall standpoint, there were some things that I voted against my party on. There are some obviously pushes on the budget that we could work on. I ultimately believe we need universal health care. Healthcare is the number one budget item for our state, and it's just not going far enough. And we don't have the dollars to cover all the health care that's needed. And we've seen that in recent weeks. So that's going to continue to be an issue. Education, $12 billion gap, pension, $16 billion gap. At the end of the day, we're going to need to start taxing the ultra rich in the state, because the burden on the working class, it's just, we've gone as far as we can to continue to tax the working class, and we just don't have enough money to cover the needs of the state. So we just have to start doing something different, asking the federal government to step up for universal health care and the cost of health care, and then taxing those uber rich so we can start closing the wealth gap.
As I was about to mention, you're a progressive. I think you just explained much of that to us, and we don't have to get into every single one of those. But you and I did an interview before the general election last year. You weren't the choice of Senate Democrats. You were kind of the progressive outsider in this, where you beat an appointed incumbent who was a union guy, who was kind of seen as more of a moderate. The Senate itself Senate Democrats, I should say, have a bit of a power pole anyway, with some more moderate forces, with some very strong progressive voices. Robert Peters' name comes to mind very quickly in that regard. What kind of response was it uphill? Was it everybody can play in the same sandbox as you come in with kind of these, I don't want to say far left, but definitely more progressive than the middle in terms of policy position? How were you responded to?
Yeah, and so there's several versions of Democrats. There's several versions of progressives too. Some focus more on social aspects. I'm an economic progressive. I'm an FDR progressive. I want to get in there and make sure that our economy is working for everybody. That is my main goal. I'm going to keep pushing legislation that focuses on that. So I think as a whole, yes, everybody can play in the sandbox, but what changes is on a day-to-day basis, who your playmate is going to change. And that includes working with Republicans on stuff. I mean, I reached across the aisle. I did that successfully and on the county board. I think I've done a good job of listening to the counterparts on the Republican side on bills, and have made concessions on some of my bills to continue to explore what that economic opportunities for our state are. How do we close that wealth gap? So yeah, there were times I was fighting progressives on bills. I think the HJR 23 is a good example. I was the sponsor for the resolution for managed lanes on I-55. There was environmentalists who didn't like this, even though the environmental assessment said it would improve air quality. There were progressives who didn't want this because it was cutting through their neighborhood. But I looked at it as an ability to keep cars from emitting of pollutions into those areas that have been impacted by air quality in the past. So look, there's going to be times where legislators are going to butt heads, and it's not because of our labels, but it's because of the things at that moment they were advocating for. So the nice thing is you can all play in the sandbox, but at the end of the day, you need 30 friends in the Senate and 60 friends in the House, and each issue you're going to have to address on its own merit.
60-31. That's all that's what they always say. You got to have 60, you got to have 30, and you got to have the governor. So you mentioned the economic part of things and the budget. You can call it a fiasco. I think if you want to, considering everyone had to stay an extra week in Springfield. There were some last minute fights over it. We knew going into this budget cycle that, especially over the 6 weeks before you all left Springfield, that revenues were going down, and that we're staring a recession in the face. How did you guys balance, and I had heard through the grapevine, and you can deny or ignore or whatever, that the rank and file Senate Democrats were kind of left in the dark when it came to budget preparations. But how did you all, specifically from the progressive side, view trying to pass a balanced budget that did not meet your checklist of wants and needs?
So I have nothing to go on, and I don't know, I mean, from past years, because this was my first. So I'm not sure if this is a normal year or how it's normally done. So keep that in mind with my next statement. But when we were given information, let's say in the Progressive Caucus, for an example, all the caucuses had similar meetings. We were given, here's the line items for these things that we need to adjust. And the Progressive Caucus came back and said, yeah, well, we want to see tax credits, revenue. I mean, you can't look at things in a vacuum, right? If you want me to just cut expenses, that's one way to balance a budget. It is not the only way to balance a budget, though. So I think there was some frustration that it's like we were, I don't want to say spoon fed, but it was like getting information was slow coming. And I think part of that, to be fair, is that negotiations on some of these things were still happening. So they didn't want to give us, here's your final spreadsheet of revenue coming in, when there were still bills being discussed on how we might impact revenue. There were still bills being discussed on tax credits of all kinds, big and small. So we didn't see it at one time, all as one picture, until it was pretty much time to vote on, because each of those is a moving part. And as a freshman senator, I was not in most of those rooms. I don't sit on appropriation committee. So from that standpoint, some of the stuff I was seeing for the first time, and we had to make decisions quickly. So what is helpful is knowing what your priorities are. And that was constantly asked of us. And I think that was asked of both sides of the aisle. What are your priorities? If you only can pick 5 things off this list, what are your top 5? Are these dollars going to be enough? And I know I personally advocated in our caucuses to pool more of our dollars to go after items that would hit more families. But that's not how it works, because everybody has issues in their own district. And so you get pieces of the pie that are carved out for different things. And, moving forward, I know that there's a lot of stuff that still needs work and where it needs to be worked on. But again, I don't sit on those appropriations committees. So I will do my best in caucuses to advocate for the things that I think need funding. But pensions continue to be an issue, and we're going to need to address that. I don't think that taxing the middle class is going to do it. So we're going to have a better solution moving forward.
Was it frustrating? Was it, I guess, what were the emotions when you all, even just freshmen, but rank and file members are just kind of sitting on the floor all day, and it's May 25th and we're not sure what's going on. We haven't seen a budget. Are you guys just like, why aren't we getting more information, even on the rank and file Democrat side?
I think it just depends. And there were questions like that. There are definitely people who were asking questions like that. Some members, though, have seen this information come before them in committee. They had ideas of what the priorities were and stuff like that. So I don't want to paint a broad stroke here that people were surprised or anything like that, because it takes a lot of us to look at this budget, right? I think that leadership did a great job. I think LG did a fantastic job of trying to field everybody's concerns. There were constant back and forth on, what are your priorities? And that was throughout. I mean, we started that process even in March. I know the Progressive Caucus was like, which of your bills have financial ask? Which of them need appropriations? And, we were highlighting even them there then and looking at that. I will say there is an area I was frustrated with, and that was the revenue side of things. So I filed 2 revenue bills. One is the LaSalle Street tax, which is a financial tax on essentially our Wall Street, the Commerce Board and Options Board. And the other one was a cargo tax container. We have the largest inland port. We have so much logistics and stuff coming in. And historically, tax, your sales taxes were brought in from brick and mortar, and those sales taxes were then used to improve your infrastructure. With everything moving online and the shipping of products, our infrastructure needs have increased because of truck traffic and other logistics issues. But yet our brick and mortar is not bringing in the same sales dollars when some of the stuff is being sold in other countries and other states, etc. So we need a mechanism to make sure that the dollars are there to fix the infrastructure. And so something like that was very frustrating to me. That's like, I filed a revenue bill. I talked with lots of policy people how to make this bill move forward. We're going to continue to make amendments to this bill as we've learned things and try to get it over the line. But I know there were other members who had revenue bills too that didn't move. So at the end, when they're like, oh, well, we can't bring in more revenue, like, but we could have. If that was the issue, we knew early on we were going to have gaps, and we do, because I'm telling you right now, for next year we're going to have 16 billion on pensions, 12 billion on education. Healthcare continues to stay 550 million at least. So we know that these are going to continue to have shortcomings. So why are we not focusing early on, January, February, March, on more of the revenue aspects of things and finding ways to bring more money into the state?
I'll get to specific tax questions here in a second, but let me ask a more overarching question. If a Joe Blow out there says, we're giving you guys $50.5 billion of our money, and you guys are running around saying that's not good enough. We can't do what we want with that. When between inflation and the job market, et cetera, it's and cost of living in Illinois is higher than it is in a lot of states, especially in the city and suburbs. How do Democrats say we are good stewards of your dollars when I can't say it's a record number because it's not after the last couple of years and the federal infusion, et cetera, but it's a lot of money the taxpayers are giving the state. How is that not enough at this point?
Because I think the analogy you gave isn't that one person's giving this, and I know it's a analogy, but it's more like there are two camps of people. One of them is giving 50 billion and the other camp is giving 0.5 billion, but continue to profit at record margins. And that the needs of the first party are so great that we need to meet those needs. Government is ultimately the safety net, and especially when it comes to economic stability. And it's our job to make sure education, infrastructure, housing, basic needs are being met. So at the end of the day, if not every player is paying their fair share, and let's look at this isn't an Illinois specific issue. This is a whole country issue. The 50% of the wealth. I'm sorry, let me back up. 70% of the country has less than 50% of the wealth. 70% of the country has less than 50% of the wealth. And the uber rich in this country, the 1%, are not paying their fair shares. If you want to go back to the 1950s and look at some of the tax abilities that we were having on people who made the most amount of money in this country, the reason that the 50s were so stable and we were able to grow by leaps and bounds is because we had the dollars and everybody was paying their fair share. So until everyone starts paying their fair share, we're going to continue to not have enough dollars. And it's not because the little guy's not doing their fair share. We are. And that is the frustration. That's my frustration. I think I share that with Republicans, that no, I don't want to be nickeled and dimed anymore. I don't want my taxes to go up. They're already really high. But the problem is we don't have people in our state who pay their fair share. And then we have to pick up the additional burden. We're paying that side of it.
But I remember Ken Griffin's guy, and I just pulled up the email. His spokesman told me last year and obviously Griffin's now hopped on his G6 and flew off to Florida since he wasted $50 million on a governor's election. But I was told that Ken Griffin, just again, as an example, paid more than $200 million in each of the past few years into the state in income taxes, which is 1% of the total revenue Illinois drew from income taxes in that time. One guy paid 1% of the entire state income tax. Is he not paying his fair share?
What was his overall income? I mean, that's real. Does he pay the same income I do? Does he pay his full 5%? And this is part of the revenue package I'm talking about. When we start carving out all of these tax incentives and tax credits and corporate loopholes for people, then he gets to take those profits and put them in entities that he wants, or into his own pocket, or into his bank accounts in other countries. And those dollars do not go into our economy. Those dollars do not go into the things that we need to pay for, but they still use our resources. I mean, I think the inland port is a perfect example that we, the taxpayers, have to pay for the infrastructure improvement, the air quality aspects, some of the building aspects of this. But then we're not the ones profiting from that. The corporations are profiting, and we have 99 temp agencies in my county. They exploit labor like no other. So now you've got poor workers. So the state is also having to then support through social programming. So how is that fair when these corporations are making tons of money and not paying their taxes back into it? They use our resources, but they're not paying their fair share, and we pick up the burden. That's not okay.
I think one of the major issues where we talk about there not being enough money is the health insurance program for undocumented immigrants here illegally, whichever terminology you want to use. That the governor's administration essentially said, we think this is going to cost 1.1 billion. The legislature gives 550 million, and the governor then pauses enrollment and causes a bit of an uproar among Latinos and progressives, et cetera. How, in your view, has the governor handled this? Is he right? Is he wrong in trying to manage this? Is this the legislature, passing the buck? How do you see how this worked out?
I think it's a lot more complex than all of that, but the reality is that we need to find a path moving forward. I've already talked about wanting universal health care, but it doesn't look like Congress is moving anywhere in that direction anytime soon. So we have to fill that gap in the meantime. So a couple of the things I want to talk about with that particular program is that moving it to managed care is going to help decrease those costs. Some of this is behavioral, meaning that if where you felt was safe to get healthcare was to go to the ER, and those emergency room visits are substantially more expensive, but that's where you felt safe that maybe ICE wasn't going to be called on you, or you weren't going to have to give certain documentation, then that's where you go, instead of maybe going to a primary care doctor and getting a referral to a specialist. So some of this is that we have to retrain our communities to say where they can go that's safe, who they should be going to for first point of contact for healthcare. And then that would bring down costs substantially. So moving this to managed care that then mandates that they have to have a primary care will help in some of those things. By pausing the program, that this is something that allows us to do those things, and it will help with future costs. If we don't make any changes, then those costs continue to go up. Looking back, obviously some of the projections were just completely off the chart. I mean, they didn't think there was as many undocumented individuals who needed healthcare. So that was a huge eye opener. But now that we have this problem, we need a way forward. Obviously, I'm encouraging anyone to enroll before July 1st, since that's the deadline, between the ages of 42 and 65. The 65 and older continue to stay into the program. But I think the other aspect of this is there was talks about getting federal matching dollars, and the federal will not match on this particular group of individuals. So we need to put pressure on Congress. Individuals live here, they work here, and they're human beings, right? So if they need health care, we need to be able to bring in those dollars. Half of our Medicaid dollars come from the federal government. If the federal government is unwilling to match these dollars, it puts a bigger burden on our state. So it's ridiculous to me that Congress would say, yeah, we're not going to match dollars for people who live in the state, especially when in the past corporations have encouraged people to come here and take these jobs at lower wages to skirt some of our protective bills on protecting workers. But now that people are here living here and they need health care, the federal government is unwilling to match these dollars. That's a problem, because if they did match it, our budget would be balanced for the whole $1 billion, right? Our $550 million would have been matched by the federal government, and we would have the dollars we need. So that's why it's a lot more complex. I don't envy the position the governor has found himself in. I think he's trying to do his best to pause the program, make some of the changes that would help save us dollars in the long run so that in the future we will be able to help these individuals. But at the end of the day, what we ultimately need is we need a universal health care that can really mandate health care, not insurance, but actual health care for people and help with those costs in a way that the state just cannot do.
Before we let you go, and I appreciate your time, Senator, and for those watching video, you're in your car in between events. So I really do appreciate you taking time. There are politics, and I've told you this, I've told others this. I'm center right, but I don't fall into a political party. I'm kind of, I've almost called myself an anti-partisan at times. But between, the right, you've got the MAGAs, the religious evangelicals, the business side, the left, you've got the social justice people, the economic progressives, the union people. There are so many different sandboxes, and everybody thinks that they're right and everybody else is wrong. In terms of not only the legislature, and obviously your party has an incredible advantage with supermajorities in the House and the Senate, but we've got a divided Congress. We've got another presidential election coming right down our right in our faces. That's going to be messy. How do we find any pathway forward politically when everybody is so in their sandbox or in their corner? It's so tribalistic. How do you as a progressive work with a MAGA? How does a religious conservative work with a social justice warrior type person? What is there middle ground for people in all of these different sandboxes and tribes at this point?
Yeah, at the end of the day, how do you win an argument, right? The person who tries to prove that they're right needs to come with receipts, facts, outcome, etc. So that would be the first thing I would say is for every issue, let's start looking at outcome-based solutions. Let's start looking at the evidence-based stuff. Let's start defining the facts and then saying, yes, this is why we're doing that. I think when we take that approach, as opposed to this is my opinion, or I think this, and look, government has done this for a long time. We do studies and some of the things we found the division in is which facts are we going to believe? Whose facts? Who's supporting those facts? So I think that's the part that needs to be healed. And I think there's a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who believe the same facts, who get the same evidence, who see the same reports, and we understand what needs to happen. And this is areas we make progress on, and we've seen it. Look, we didn't pass all these bills just by jamming every bill down everyone's throat. I know that's what people think about, but there's a small handful of bills, and a lot of them focus around social issues where it's very complex. You don't have straight facts across the board because they're very highly personalized, and each person might have an anecdotal story, and it's harder to set policies on anecdotal evidence as opposed to factual evidence, right? That's based on studies and large swaths of people. So I think on issues like that, we're going to continue to have to listen to our representatives. Listen to our constituents and understand the needs when it comes to those social bills. But for the large majority of the bills that we pass, they're about good government. They're about trying to utilize our dollars that are most effective and efficient and meeting the needs that impact the state at any given time. So I have a lot of hope that we can continue to come together. I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting, which puts policies. You can have a number of Republicans run, a number of Democrats run, and it allows you to look at what that individual brings to the table as opposed to just an R&D label. But it's going to take us a little while to educate on that process. And I think that will help close some of the divide. But at the end of the day, focusing on facts, being willing to be open-minded and listen, and admit when you're wrong. I've definitely admitted when I'm wrong. And I think that's a lot of humbleness that needs to come from our elected officials to show that it can be done. And I think that we can make it happen.
Senator Rachel Ventura. Senator, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thanks to Senator Rachel Ventura for taking time. Appreciate her perspective. She and I come from different sides of these issues. And I like talking to smart people who disagree with me because I think that they're their perspective is important. Let's move now to our friend Jeremy Gorner from the Chicago Tribune. Jeremy just wrapped up what was his second legislative session working the political beat, but kind of your first one for real. 2021 wasn't necessarily, or 2022 wasn't even a real session in terms of how we usually do things. So any reflections or thoughts on how the first real full let's all dive in and jump on shrapnel kind of session went for you?
Well, it seemed to me that a lot of the main issues of the day, so to speak, were really tackled, before the 103rd General Assembly convened, like in lame duck, like right before that. Like you had the signing of the assault weapons ban. You had, before that, and you had leading up to that, you also had the changes made to the Safety Act, and right away there were legal challenges to both of those monumental pieces of legislation. So I think part of my coverage during session included a lot, myself and one or two of my colleagues on just trying to keep track of all the legal challenges from the previous General Assembly regarding the Safety Act and regarding the assault weapons ban. But regarding this particular session, there were there were a lot of interesting bills here and there, many of them that kind of stood on their own. The book ban legislation certainly was kind of thematic because of the whole debate on culture wars that we've seen across the country. We saw a little bit more on gun legislation. We saw a little bit of perceived, a lot of Governor Pritzker's critics were looking at his handling of the immigrant health care program and how there was looked an apparent miscalculation there on how much it would cost. So it just seemed like there was just such a wide range of issues. There really wasn't a theme of when you look at all the bills at once for this session. But
I actually joked with John Seidel, our friend from the Sun-Times, that some days it feels like we're courts reporters more than political reporters.
Right. And that was the thing, is that I think that half the time it seemed like myself and Dan Petrella, especially, we were keeping track of just all the assault weapons cases and trying to get those straightened out on the federal and state level. Just keeping track of all that. So yeah, that was a big part that ate up a big part of session for sure.
All right. So you mentioned the immigrant health insurance program situation, which I think, which we touched on with Senator Ventura a minute ago. It's not, it's a program that is specifically targeted at people who are, immigrants who are in the country illegally, undocumented, whatever terminology you want to use. It's not asylum seekers. It's specifically that line. And the Pritzker administration had its estimate that this program was going to balloon in costs to over $1 billion in the next fiscal year. Advocates kind of dispute that number, but now that the governor has limited enrollment, they're kind of moving it into more managed care. What kind of pushback is he dealing with internally, specifically among Latino caucus members? We heard some pretty frustrated members initially. Some of that's quieted down, so I wonder if they're having some more productive talks in the background. Progressives as well. What has the pushback been like to the governor, and how have they responded?
Well, I mean, I think anytime the governor is going to put limits on this program, there's going to be pushback. I mean, that was kind of a given, and that was, because this was something that, at the time, like right before, the governor, imposed the rule changes, a few weeks ago, putting the caps on the program. there were legislators that wanted to expand the program even more. I believe it was for anyone over the age of 19. That legislation was not successful, at least in the spring session. So clearly, there was still momentum among advocates that they still wanted to expand this thing. So naturally, I know last week there were one or two rallies from healthcare advocates who obviously who were not thrilled with the governor's decision to do what he did. And advocates said that they're still going to keep fighting, basically, to ensure that that immigrants get proper health care, because many immigrants have never had been able to secure health care for something like this. So it has quieted down, though, like you said, Patrick. But yeah, I mean, I think that the pushback seemed pretty predictable, just because, like I said, towards the end of session, the momentum that advocates had is that they still wanted to expand this thing, and it's something that they're still pursuing. But yeah, as far as just like, why it's died down, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see, another wave of, maybe some compromises here, or, again, advocates trying to work with the governor's office to see what they can do, come the fall.
And I'm not going to try and lump progressives into one big bucket here, because there are a lot of different views and a lot of different people. But, as you talk to a lot of the newer members, specifically, some of the really more recently elected, very progressive ones, it seemed like the talk that there's not enough money to go around was not computing. Was that the issue for leadership, was trying to explain to some of their more progressive members that, listen, guys, I know you have this laundry list of things you want, but we don't have the money. How hard was that for Welch and Harmon and Pritzker specifically?
Well, I mean, just talking to lawmakers, I mean, I think a good way to describe it is that, under the new leadership, they were seeing a lot of growing pains, right? I mean, for, you had a new chief budgeteer. You had, you new Speaker of the House, and you had just a lot of newer members, and 78 members in the House. It's the most they've ever had, and a lot of new faces. So, I mean, part of it, appeared to be, lawmakers who were just really getting more acclimated into what their new roles were. And, and it was my understanding too that, leadership really wanted to accommodate a lot of the asks from lawmakers, asks for, what they wanted for their particular districts. So, yeah, I mean, it seemed like this, at least when you look at what Pritzker did a couple of weeks ago by capping the immigrant healthcare program, that was kind of a way to pump the brakes a little bit. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this, just from talking to lawmakers, has to do with just fresh faces who are really, appearing to kind of get acclimated to their new roles. I mean, aside from the immigrant healthcare issue, another issue that had come up was even among Democrats was Invest in Kids. The Invest in Kids program, which was not included in the budget, which has, Democrats have received backlash for that as well. Of course, the governor and I believe State Senator L.G. Sims have kind of indicated that they're going to try to make that work, or not try to make that. I mean, there's going to be more discussions about it come the fall. But this appears to be like really just, another pattern of, again, different faces, different leaders just trying to get used to their roles.
One of the things that you wrote about as we record this Friday morning in the Tribune today is the increase or at least return to normal of the grocery tax. The gasoline tax also has its cost or inflation adjustment. So it goes up again as of Saturday morning in the state. I wrote this week about the holidays that were put in place last year during the campaign season that were clearly campaign fodder for Democrats. How do Democrats look at what these tax holidays did? Obviously it was intended for political benefit, because if you go to a grocery store, it didn't save you a lot of money. If you go to a gas pump, we're still paying over $4 a gallon in a lot of the suburbs. The relief hasn't really shown itself in the numbers, which I don't have in front of me now. I think it was 70 million on gas and 180 some so far on groceries. We're not talking gigantic amounts of money back in consumers' pockets. So how do Democrats view how those tax plans worked?
I mean, I think that, what was it, like 9%?
I mean, they won a crap ton of elections, so clearly it worked on that.
Right. I mean, the justification for it, at least on the surface of it, was, there's 9% inflation. This is, we're at least trying to do our part, and, we're trying to do little by little anything that we can do to ease the burden of costs on consumers. Now the inflation rate's what? It's around 4%, something like that. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something that they predicted, that the inflation, although it's still high, would go down as much as it did over the last year. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really just that. I mean, I think like for the individual consumer, you spend $100 on groceries, and you get $1 off. I mean, but I think that with any elected official who's overseeing budgetary matters, if you add that up, there could be some savings there. And of course that kind of makes Republicans nervous, because some of that, I believe that to fill that void, is for the grocery tax was what, $400 million, I think it was, Patrick.
It's 180 so far. I think it'll be more by the time they get those sales tax numbers in, but that's also a local revenue generator, not a state revenue generator too.
Right. And of course, I know just in talking to some Republicans about this, that they felt like if the Democrats really wanted to do something meaningful, they would have either extended the grocery tax or made it permanent. I know that, and then, another thing too was that, that $400 million or whatever for that fund that was supposed to be created to fill the void for the grocery tax. I mean, if that's, obviously that's something that could be very impactful for communities. But I mean, a lot of people, many people I talked to think, sounded like the 1% drop was pretty negligible, in the grand scheme of things. And Republicans,
listen,
of course,
if you're buying groceries for an 18-month-old that eats everything, $100, the dollar off 100 doesn't feel like much help.
Right. So I think it's really hard to tell exactly what kind of, what the Democrats kind of got out of it over the last year, aside from, winning elections, basically. But yeah, and then of course you have the, so yeah, it's hard to tell with that. I mean, and then when tomorrow that, there'll be an increase of 3.1 cents a gallon more for gasoline, which, was expected, obviously. And that again is something that could add up.
Essentially a nickel increase this year, because the gas tax expired, or the holiday expired January 1st.
Right. It's
last year. So that went back into effect, and now it's going another one in July. So you get two in 7 months, essentially.
Right. So, right. I mean, yeah, when I meant the 3.1 cents from January.
The new one, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, again, that's something that could impact people who are, who drive for a living, Uber drivers, taxi drivers, maybe, but it's not, with the high price of gasoline, the way it is. I mean, especially in Chicago area, I mean, you still have Cook County tax, you have city tax. I mean, that again is still fairly negligible. But yeah, I mean, I think like to what you're saying, beyond the ability to maybe help perhaps get reelected. I mean, there hadn't really been there hadn't really been much else that was pointed to, what Democrats got out of it, basically.
Jeremy Gorner from the Chicago Tribune. Jeremy, I appreciate the time as always. Have a good 4th, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Great. Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Thanks to Jeremy Gorner from the Chicago Tribune for his time. Thanks to Senator Rachel Ventura for joining us. And thank you for your time as you've joined us on the show today. We really do appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation, your thoughts anytime. Go subscribe to the newsletter at theillinoize.com. That's ILLINOIZE.com. And we'd love to have you and continue to share our insights and opinions and news we find, all that as we continue on in this very interesting time in Illinois politics. Have a great 4th of July, Independence Day, and we'll talk to you soon here on the Illinoize.